As he dried in the air and the luster of his scales dulled, all the colors I'd always noticed in his body seemed to disappear, and I wondered if I had always imagined the green, blue, red, and gray. Jeffrey bundled the paper towel around him and closed it with a strip of tape. We were going to bury him in the backyard. "Make him a headstone," Jeffrey said, because he knew I would want to do it. He pulled a flat-sided stone from the heap in the sink. I patted it dry and wrote Rufus's name across it in permanent marker. "Wait," I said, and ran across the kitchen to the bedroom. On my knees, I dug under our bed for the journal I was writing in the year Kim and I bought Rufus. "I want to put his dates on the stone," I called out. I knew it had been March, and I thought it was early in the month, and almost certainly a weekend, probably Sunday. As I flipped through the pages, passing all those old recorded days, I skimmed for his name. Kim and I buying a pet would have been a big enough event to write down, and I remembered writing it down, but it wasn't there. I checked February, turning page after page, searching for his name or any word that would signal the story of his coming. I checked January, though I knew it would have been too early. April was too late because in April we knew Jeffrey. "What are you doing?" he said from the kitchen. They were waiting, so I just wrote down his lifespan in years, wondering what sense I could make of any of this if I couldn't get my memory to match the facts. We stood in the backyard, under unruly lilac branches showing off new blooms. I dug out a hole with a hand trowel. "What do we say?" Jeffrey asked, dropping the white packet in, covering it with dirt, and tamping down the stone on top. "I don't know," I said, and we all stared at the rock. Kim sighed. "To Rufus, a great fish, we love you." For so long, even though we knew he was sick, it seemed as though Rufus might just go on living the way he was. He survived one day with his tail crimp, so he'd always survive the next. But there we were. I wanted to say something about how uncanny it was that he died that day, on my anniversary with Jeffrey, how our relationship had always been as old as he was, and how it was also the weekend that Kim was back in the apartment for the first time in years, several of which had passed in silence. And that I was sorry for what I'd hoped for the three of us back then, for everybody to contain their feelings, for nothing to ever change. A year later, when Jeffrey and I finally moved from that apartment to another state, we took Rufus's old stones with us. I'd always planned to do something with him, and still thought I would, so we packed them into a shoebox stuffed with wads of newspaper. At our new house on the day we moved in, Jeffrey unpacked the stones and piled them in the front flower bed in the spot under the mailbox. He cleared up the weeds, and the smooth dark rocks sat there like the marker of something. We unpacked everything else and made the stuff of our life fit this new place. That first night, we fell into our same bed in our different room, and when I switched off the lamp, I said, "Look, on the ceiling was a sky of glow-in-the-dark stars, leftovers." "Wow," he said, and we kissed and slept. Months later, it was somehow over between us, and I lived in the house alone, and he moved to his own city, and we had crossed through each other's names in those emergency contact boxes. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how you can be sure of something and still always be wrong. In the front flower bed, the weeds grew, and I didn't keep up with them, and eventually I noticed they were taller than Rufus's pile, and I just let them go. I decided then that I would leave his stones there, even when I moved from the house to any future place. I like imagining someone pulling weeds one day, revealing the pile of them again, and this person thinking the stones odd and beautiful without having any idea of what they really mean. That essay that I just read couldn't exist if the goldfish didn't die on that particular day, because it would have never occurred to me that his death had been significant. It was the fact that he died on my anniversary and the first time that Kim had been back in the apartment. That fact lodged in my head, and then as I thought about that years later, I was like, oh, that's an essay, and it has something to do with how we fit tragedy, how things end, is that we go looking for this kind of significance. And I knew that the goldfish was going to be important in that essay, but I actually got more excited as I was writing it, and I started to have to look up goldfish facts, is when I got more excited about the goldfish meaning more than just a goldfish. And how I get to things like a 3 goldfish means it's a troubling, because that fits metaphorically with the sort of triangle of people, and those kinds of facts. And I don't know that when you're starting off, that you need to know all of the metaphorical importance, or you need to think like, oh, I'm going to write this essay about something, and I'm going to use cats as a metaphor. That would, to me, I think that would feel really contrived. I have to like write through the experience first, and then see what is in there that I've kind of really paid attention to, and then make that the sort of central metaphor, make it look like I knew it the whole time. My essays are in present tense. That just is the tense I'm inclined to. And so you have a narrator who's telling things to the audience and giving them hints about this sort of larger story, but not picking up on it himself, without the narrator seeming dumb. And in that way, in some ways you can kind of rely on stereotypes a little bit. We have all these associations with the effeminate kid, and that can sometimes work, but you don't want it to rely too much on that, because then it feels really easy. It's more about having the narrator describe an image, or be fascinated by something, and talk a lot and notice a lot. It just got really loud. Talk about something a lot and be kind of obsessed by something or bored by something, and then the reader getting like, oh, well, kind of being smarter and seeing, oh, the reason he's obsessed with, the reason why he might compare that to this. The one we're talking about today, he has a crush on somebody who is very sort of muscular, and I compare the veins in and the chords in his hand as looking like the inside of the piano. And that kind of metaphor is, showing that this is a kid who is inside of the piano rather than on the baseball field. Those kinds of clues to let the reader know something that the narrator doesn't realize. I knew I was writing about the goldfish the whole time. I think it's probably the only essay of mine. I hate titles. I hate titling things. But I think that was the only essay where I thought of the title first. And for some reason, I just was really attracted to the idea of something being a goldfish history. And so I knew that I was writing about the goldfish, but I didn't know sort of what I was talking about when I first started. I didn't know that the goldfish could be such a metaphor, and that the goldfish bowl could be such a metaphor for what was going on in the apartment. That, I say, how can you hide in a goldfish bowl? It's a place where everything is out in the open. That has a lot to do with the fact that for a long time in our apartment, nothing was out in the open, and then everything was, but I had to push someone out of my life in order to get that feeling. Or a goldfish bowl is one of those things that you only ever need one of. And in that way, that's why Kim and Jeffrey couldn't both be in my life, because they were like one of those things that you only ever need one of, a companion. I didn't get to those kinds of connections until revision, where I sort of was recognizing all the things that a goldfish could be, but I had to write through the experience. Yes?
I was wondering about your writing these essays from your experience, and how do you strike a balance between, with the details and things like the dialogue, between actually remembering it or coming up with it in hindsight to work it into a more cohesive story?
Right. I don't get really hung up on what I remember exactly. I think that my memory and I think everyone's memory and imagination are, I don't know anything about neuroscience, but I think that they are probably in the exact same spot in the brain. Like, I tell my creative writing students that they're roommates, and that the imagination is the messy one who's like throwing its socks all over the floor, and memory is the one that picks the socks up without having to be asked. And if you have that if you picture it that way, it can actually be helpful, and that you can, if you're writing about a personal experience from when you're 5 or 7 or something, you can get really stalled by worrying about, well, I want to show what my mother looked like, but I can't remember what she was wearing on that certain day, so now I can't write about it. But I think that if you let your imagination kind of, help your memory out, that you remember what your mother wore around that time period. You remember how your mother dressed, how she probably still dresses. You remember how she talked, and the gist of what she said, and you can probably write in her voice really well. It's a voice you've heard your entire life. So I'm fine with, creating my mother's dialogue because I know I'm getting it very close to how she would have said something. The same with my brother, who I write about quite a bit, has a very distinctive voice. And I could write him saying anything, even stuff he's never said, because I just know how he would phrase stuff. And there are people in our lives who we know so well that we don't have to get tense and nervous about, did I get that exactly right? Because it's going to put up walls when you're writing your scenes and close off possibilities that you otherwise could just trip into some wonderful, beautiful detail or moment. When I was an undergraduate, I thought, I'm going to be a fiction writer, and I'm going to write novels. And had always only read fiction. And found it very discouraging because I wasn't very good at it. I would write about this and I could write decent sentences, but it would just be this person who just kind of went through their day and did this stuff, and then about page 19, something would happen and then it would be over. And it made no sense and didn't mean anything. And then I didn't write for a long time, but I still always wanted to be a writer. I lived in Chicago for 10 years, as this points out, and worked in advertising and always said, I'll write when I get home from work, but never did. And then I went to an MA graduate program that allowed us to take all genres of writing. And I took novel writing and screenwriting and magazine writing and poetry. And I took creative nonfiction without knowing what it was. And it was like a huge turning point because I realized that I had been reading a lot of nonfiction, creative nonfiction, but not recognizing that it was its own thing. And so it was that class that sort of made me want to go to creative nonfiction school and pursue that. For some reason, I can write a story in a much more satisfying shape when I have all of it already, where I can look back through my memory and sort of say, this is the beginning and this is the ending. When I have to create that out of thin air, it's very meandering. And it was discouraging for me as a young writer because I didn't want to write a lot. I wanted it to be done the first time it came out. And now that I'm old, I know that that's never how it happens.
But yet you are writing novels now, right?
Novel, yeah.
Novel. So how are you finding the structure? And then I think we're done.
I think I said today in my press talk, I don't think now that nonfiction and fiction are very separate. For me, they're kind of the same. And even I'm discovering that even as I'm writing about someone who is of a different gender in a different time period from me, with a completely different life, that it's still me. And I think that's.
So you're still finding the structure there.
There's some aspect of me in everything.
Excellent.
I think we're done.
Thank you. Thank you very much.